The Idries Shah Foundation podcast. Practical psychology for today. Featuring the works of Idries Shah, narrated by David Ault. Welcome to the Idries Shah Foundation podcast. On this edition of the podcast, we will hear selections from The Englishman's Handbook by Idries Shah. 1. The questions they ask. Advice is seldom welcome, and those who want it most always like it least. Lord Chesterfield. Foreigners are well known for asking such infuriating questions as, is England in Britain or Britain in England? They want to know where Britain is, and who the Brits are, and what connection, if any, all this has with the United Kingdom or Great Britain. And this isn't only among the "this is Tuesday, we must be in London, England" brigade. I have even been asked, in America by what is known there as an educator, where in Britain the uck is. When I denied all knowledge of such a place, I was treated as an impostor and disinvited from a barbecue being held by the state governor. An Australian conman, overhearing the uck question and quicker-witted than I, waded straight in. The uck is a part of London near Earl's Court, and its inhabitants are called uckies, he told a riveted audience of New England socialites. Someone forgot to lock up the gubernatorial silver coffee spoons, and the Aussie got away with them, I am glad to report. As an English man or woman, you will regularly be annoyed by foreign questions. You will probably want to answer, "We are English, and that is enough. After all, the French are French, and the Italians are Italians. Why can't we be the same, at least to some extent? We are, you know, in Europe now." You may, too, be inhibited by the trace memory of a thing called the Race Relations Act. For those many English people who don't know about it, I summarize that it is some kind of a law which keeps getting dragged up in the newspapers and prevents some people from speaking their mind, while encouraging others to speak theirs. Someone once got into trouble with it by advertising for a Scotsman to cook porridge, that kind of thing. Or it may just be a case of stiff upper lip and a disinclination to be a general information bureau. After all, it has taken centuries for the various meanings and nuances of Englishry to develop. I suggest referring people to a dictionary. You can most easily do this by claiming not to be able to understand the question or the foreigner's accent. In any case, any good English dictionary will afford hours of harmless fun. British, it says in one, refers both to the old inhabitants of these islands and also to the non-British people who came after them. Also that Briton means a Welshman. Since Welsh also means foreigner, you'll see what I mean by fun. And you may be glad to know the foreigner will discover from the pages of that same authority that he is himself alien, extraneous, not belonging, unconnected, not appropriate. And all without your having to say a word or express any opinion. Your foreigner is already walking on eggs. Even foreignness includes want of relation to something, remoteness, and is confidently traced to its origin in out of doors. The Englishman's home is his castle, remember? This seems to be the reason why out of doors is so remote and has no relation to something. Those English people, they are surely very few, who have felt trepidation at a possible encounter with a foreigner, may now see how unfounded such feelings really are. The foreigner is not likely to be much of a problem, not in the long run anyway. And not where his confusion about the island race is concerned. You can readily confuse him several times more effectively than he could ever confuse you. English people have centuries of practice at this. A question asked of Frank Barrett in the Dordogne was reported by him in The Independent. A French couple found their British guests hard to follow. "We were all very polite," said the patron. "But why did the British never seem to be enjoying themselves on holiday? They always seemed so distrait, so intense." I have noticed this too. When giving a lecture, if I see the sea of faces lose all expression or become slightly twisted, as if struggling with an idea, I know I am going to get a great deal of applause. They must have been enjoying themselves. This must have something to do with the supposed habit of taking their pleasures sadly. Mind you, I think that one of the reasons that English and other Brits are concentrating so hard, even when on holiday, is that they are trying to solve some of the problems that also bedevil visitors. These certainly take some solving. An English person could tell at a glance the difference between jam and marmalade. But he or she would be hard put, as I was when closely questioned the other day, to tell a foreigner what that difference actually is. It is apparently not enough to say that the preserve is made with oranges, lemons, or limes, since the word marmalade itself comes from quince or honey apple. Or again, how do you know when to say the middle of the road or the centre of the road? This was worrying an English friend recently. He works in Russia and rang me up from there to see whether I could help him answer a Slavic perplexity about the matter. A German asked me why British Telecom has a telephone number which you can ring if your telephone is not working. What, he wanted to know, do you do if you cannot ring because your instrument is out of order? A Dane writes why it is obligatory to carry canines on the London Underground. Being a good Scandinavian, he also wondered why so many people were ignoring the sign, "Dogs must be carried on the escalators." (2) Aversion Therapy. If the English did not exist, it would not be necessary to invent them. Attributed to Charles de Gaulle. Most nationalities boast about themselves. There is a certain amount of this among the English. However, there is also so much running themselves down that one has to suspect that the motive is a kind of aversion therapy. Its aim is to deter all but the bravest from visiting the country. One can imagine, deep in the secret English policy determination headquarters bunker, the sign, "Make announcements to deter visits by foreigners." The press, it would appear, are the principal tool. I too have been in my bunker, making an exhaustive study of a selection of cuttings stretching back over 20 years. The pattern is unmistakable. Britain, we are told, is a terrifying place. The people are dreadful, and there is little worth seeing anyway. The sensible foreigner had better stay at home. Especially when "pilots risking lives by drinking," shouts a report in the Sunday Times. Heavy drinking is endangering the health of British airline pilots and putting passengers at risk, an international study has revealed. British pilots drink more than their counterparts anywhere in the world, with 1 in 8 consuming the equivalent of 31 whiskies or 15 pints of beer a week. Only 1 in 28 is teetotal. Of course, our foreigner may avoid this hazard by travelling to Britain on a foreign airline, perhaps an Islamic, completely teetotal one. There is, however, another line of defence, the people. Adrian Woodridge in the Daily Mail asks, "Mad in Britain, are we really a balmy nation?" He follows up with some stunning information. Are we British bonkers? A new survey, laboriously compiled by Mori, Market and Opinion Research International, suggests that we are positively raving. We have little grasp of what is going on around us, and we spend much of our time repeating comforting clichés and meaningless phrases. To the Red Queen in Alice, it was an achievement to believe half a dozen impossible things before breakfast. To the modern Briton, it seems, this is not even a challenge. Along with self-delusion, self-contradiction seems to be a national vice. 1 in 4 Tory supporters said they would like to see a socialist society. The very people who blame crime on lack of parental discipline claim that they are not worried about the rise in illegitimacy. 9 out of 10 people describe themselves as active Christians, but fewer than 1 in 5 bother to go to church. Many believe in heaven, but not in life after death. Before he can meet people to verify that report, our foreigner may have to brave Heathrow Airport, a place so impossible it has driven even residents to emigrate. The Weasel, in the Independent magazine, says, "I once asked Graham Greene why he had decided to leave England, and he replied that he couldn't stand the sound of braying English middle-class voices, particularly at Heathrow Airport." Mind you, a visitor who did find his way to England would be doing well by English standards. A Sunday Times poll found that 1 in 6 of the population could not find Britain on a map, so it seems as if several million Britons do not know where they are. If and when he does penetrate the charmed circle of English culture, he will find life here odd enough to make him wish to leave at once, or stay forever. He may travel by the Tube, the London Underground railway transport system. Visitors note with pleasure that the name of many a station is lettered in an almost continuous band all along the upper part of platform walls. It seems designed to allow passengers to read the station's name from any part of the train. An excellent idea. The only problem is that the windows of the trains are set just too low for the lettering to be visible, so the name cannot in fact be read at all, unless you are standing directly by the doors when they are opened. In the rush hour, when you need most to know where you are, the name is obliterated even from that position by the throng of passengers entering and leaving the train. I approached an official to find out what the explanation could be. He was a London transport employee who described himself as a Jamaican Englishman, and he explained, "They make the trains too low, or perhaps the rails, or maybe both. On the other hand, perhaps they make the writing too high." That's all right then. In spite of the Tube's idiosyncrasies, our visiting foreigner may find himself at the Zoological Gardens. Here, according to the diary of The Times, "The iguanas in the London Zoo reptile house drink from a brown earthenware bowl of the kind available at any pet shop. The bowl even has 'dog' in large black lettering on its side." So, what impression does all this make on the hapless foreigner? The British Tourist Authority, which asked foreigners at ports of exit for their views, revealed that the departing visitors found the country exotic. A description, says the Standard reporting this, more usually applied to Bali or the Seychelles. British newspapers seem to me to have an alarming propensity to treat their readers as imbeciles. I wonder how many London commuters reading their evening paper did not know that Bali or the Seychelles were considered more exotic than Britain. And just after the Gulf War, a major English newspaper published a huge photograph of a portrait of Saddam Hussein riddled with bullet holes. The caption said, "A picture of Saddam Hussein riddled with bullet holes." There is, though, something rather endearing, sort of small town about this. However, to resume, why do the foreigners call Britain exotic? Because, we are informed, they have to cross the water to get here. But surely people cross water to reach all manner of destinations which could hardly be described as exotic. Do the Maltese find France across the sea exotic? Or the Turks journeying to Spain, how do they feel? I decided to conduct my own informal poll at a major British airport. First, I asked a bunch of Danish students at Gatwick if they would call England exotic. They roared with laughter, and one said, "Many thanks, that's a nice polite way of putting it. We'll certainly use that one." They moved off towards passport control, and my attention was seized by a tiny, rumpled figure. He plucked at my sleeve, and I noticed that he was wearing a clerical dog collar. "Why, oh why do they do it, Monsieur?" he almost sobbed. From this I inferred that he was French. I forgot the old English proverb, "Think today and speak tomorrow," and immediately addressed him. "Is it the English, mon brave?" "It is indeed. Why, oh why?" "Why what?" "Why do they demote me just because I am a Catholic?" "Can they do such a thing?" "Assuredly. I am a curé, which means in English vicar, but they call me curate, which in French is only vicaire. If I call myself vicar, I am demoting myself to curate." It is, I agree with the Frenchman, pretty rum when you come to think of it that the British take other people's titles and reverse their meaning. But it clearly is an excellent way of dealing with foreigners. Knowing that the English are not all keen to have their country flooded with visitors, even ecclesiastical ones, I added my mite to the aversion therapy evidently aimed at the French clergy. "Monsieur le curé," I said, "you are evidently poorly informed as to the conditions which obtain in this peculiar island." "I am indeed," he said, "but I am burning to understand." "There is an old English proverb," I continued, "to the effect that zeal with knowledge is a runaway horse." "Horse?" "Yes, indeed," I went on, having stirred in, as you will have noticed, a measure of confusion. "Horse is the least of it. Have you not heard of the lack of human rights in England? Why, anything might happen to you." If he had been worried before, he was really disturbed now. "Human rights?" "Human rights. Have you not read the sage words of Anthony Lester QC, chairman of the International Centre for the Protection of Human Rights?" "No, I have not." He says that even citizens of Britain, unlike most other citizens of Europe, continue to be denied speedy and effective remedies before their own courts for breaches of their basic rights and freedoms by the state and its agents. "Even their own citizens," he gasped. "Even their own citizens." It took him some time to recover sufficiently to ask the routine question about whether England was in Britain or Britain in England. I ignored it and hit him again with another peculiarity of the English which I hoped would be decisive. "Do you know about their hedges?" I demanded. "Their edges?" "Yes, hedges, les haies." "No," he said weakly, "but tell me about them." Drawing from my wallet a cutting from the bunch which I keep for emergencies to combat logical foreigners, I read, "Feason's Hedgesetter was the answer to a gardener's prayer, a chemical that slowed the growth of privet hedges so that they needed to be cut only twice a year." The Frenchman was clearly impressed. "The perfidious ones are assuredly clever inventors," he allowed. "Yes," I told him, and the account from the London newspaper The Mail on Sunday continues, "But it was quietly dropped in 1972 after the company found that gardeners liked cutting hedges." That really did for him. He took the next flight back to Paris. Today's newspapers are full of accounts of the millions spent every year in policing the foreigners who seek to enter Britain. If the English had the courage of their convictions, they would brief their officials with the contents of this book and save a fortune every day. Come to think of it, I am thinking of stationing myself permanently at a London airport and doing my own stint towards this laudable cause. 3. The French. "He is not laughed at who laughs at himself." English proverb. Many English people insist that dealing with the French can't be done at all. On the other hand, it has to be done. The Channel Tunnel is in operation. The continent is no longer cut off. As we saw in my dealings with the French vicar, the weapon of first choice should certainly be illogicality. The French pride themselves on their clear and rational thinking. The English, they believe, are confused and confusing. Very well, let battle commence. Geoffrey Wheatcroft, one of London's brightest journalists, launched a typical broadside. Our mean and peevish, drizzling and damp little island avoids the cher maître superstition of France, where every obvious charlatan is revered and every modish fad is greeted with childlike credulity. Remember, English people tend to believe that their country has never been conquered or invaded. Most know, of course, that the Danes, Norwegians, Romans, Celts, Saxons, and French did occupy the place. But the fact that the Spanish Armada didn't make it somehow seems to blot out the rest. Many members of the community would agree with Judge Michael Argyle, who is credited with saying, "There have been many attempted invasions of the United Kingdom since 1066, and they have failed." It is unclear exactly what United Kingdom is being referred to. The UK we know and love did not exist in 1066. It only came into existence on the 1st of January 1801, Haydn's Dictionary of Dates, if then. By the way, it is said that the phrase was never officially laid down by any governmental authority or document, and so the country under this name may not actually exist yet. When you research it, you find, bingo, there has been an invasion recently in historical terms, and it was a successful one. Britain today could be said to be built on it. But the Dutch mercenary troops of William of Orange, who became an English king, simply do not impinge on the public consciousness. English people are always taught that the military operations and occupation of 1688–91 were the Glorious Revolution, run by foreigners, after which there was a Bill of Rights and Parliament reigned supreme. But a foreign king, Scottish, French, Danish, German, a European army, an occupation to achieve English freedoms? The truth, says Jonathan Israel, is dramatically different from the official British version, believed by virtually all. He tells us, "In reality, England, and later Ireland, was invaded by a large and well-trained foreign army, initially 21,000 men but later increased, that was brought here in November 1688 on 500 ships, an armada 4 times larger than the Spanish Armada of 1588. This vast strategic exercise drew additional troops and resources from Germany and Scandinavia, and was undertaken in collusion with several other Protestant and Catholic powers. Nor is that all. The invasion was planned and organized long before a tiny group of unrepresentative and not particularly important English dissidents sent their so-called invitation to the Prince of Orange. And although William led the invasion, he had very limited powers in the Dutch Republic. The Dutch army landed in Devon and gained military control of southern England. It had little assistance from the English rebels. Our authority continues. Readers will not find a word about the next episode in any British school, university, textbook, or standard work. But the truth is that when the Prince of Orange marched in triumph into London in December 1688, he did so after ordering all the remaining English troops in the capital to withdraw a minimum of 20 miles from the city. The bulk of the Dutch army was brought into or placed around London. Dutch Blue Guards took up all the posts around Whitehall and Hyde Park, and London remained under Dutch military occupation for 18 months. In effect, the King of England, James II, was deported by the Prince of Orange and a foreign army from his own land. The British had to repay William for the expenses of this adventure out of taxation, and he didn't even have the pretext that he was the legitimate successor to the throne, as William of Normandy could claim, on any legal grounds. The near naturalization of the Norman occupation causes interest and consternation among the French, particularly intellectuals, who tend to regard Britain as a former colony. They even call the English les roast beef, though it was the French themselves who introduced this dish to England. Pointing this out is a simple and effective ploy for dealing with them. The Times has further tips for its readers. It warns them not to forget the golden rule of French officialdom. Anything is possible, but first there must be drama. Any request is always met with a curt shake of the head and the phrase, "Ce n'est pas possible." So what is one to do? In England, if someone says that something is impossible, that is that. It is impossible 99 times out of 100. But in France? Well, the article continues. That is, of course, merely the opening shot across the bows of a battle, which must include much arm-waving, simulated lack of understanding, imputations about one's parentage, remarks about one's countenance, and a final grudging acceptance that, yes, perhaps you do have some sort of right to be here, and yes, much shrugging, eyes raised heavenwards, perhaps you will find the right desk over there. You have to know your opponent, of course, and this information may be useful with officials. But what do they think of you, the Englishman? I have mentioned the Eurotunnel link between France and England. A director of Eurotunnel's operations was quoted in the Sunday Telegraph on his way of dealing with the English. The British are probably less flexible than the French. If they put up a wall of resistance to a suggestion, the only way to deal with it is to push back, but not to provoke a clash. You do it with a smile. So the English have to be firm with the French, and the French with the English. Of course, this book is about how to deal with. You may wish to annoy or to please the French. If the former, you can tell them that in England, French leave means going off without proper permission. If the latter, you might quote the Old English proverb recorded by J. Hayward in 1546. Jack would be a gentleman if he could speak French. Quotations are always useful for good or ill, depending on your intentions. It is in some ways a pity that you are not a Yank, for the proverb about Yanks is even more flattering to the French. When a good American dies, he goes to Paris. And yet the poor Americans are constantly lamenting, "We have a love-hate relationship with the French. We love them, they hate us." Francis Bacon, Essays of Seeming Wise, gave us an even pithier saying to think about. The French are wiser than they seem, he said, which is perhaps intended as a compliment. And the aphorism concludes, and the Spaniards seem wiser than they are. 4. The Spanish. Millions of English people spend their holidays in Spain every year. Many, perhaps most of them, seem to come back with only the fuzziest idea of what the Spanish are like. This is not, in spite of what the tabloid press insists, because virtually all British tourists are lagerlouts and drunk all the time. It is mainly, as I have observed on the spot, that they spend all their time with each other. Apart from the time they spend with waiters, who tell them nothing about Spain, and, for personal reasons, less about themselves. So it is not often that English people have to deal with Spaniards as such. Francis Bacon's Spaniards may seem wiser than they are simply because nobody from England has much contact with them, even in Spain. But within Spain one has to be careful once one strays beyond the confines of the English pubs in Torremolinos. In Mallorca, for instance, or Barcelona, people seem loath to call themselves Spanish at all. They are Catalans. I was sitting outside a Palma cafe one day, reading, from curiosity, a copy of Arriba the fascist newspaper, when a peddler approached. When I ignored him, he struck the paper from my hand, calling me a degenerate Spaniard befouling his Catalan homeland. Again, in Cordoba, I was so fed up with being elbowed off the pavement that I caught hold of a burly pedestrian who was about to push me into the roadway and demanded to know why he was so aggressive. "You South Americans are all alike," he shouted. I learnt my Spanish in Argentina. Then he informed me that it is no part of our culture to give way in the street, therefore it cannot be polite or rude, and you should learn our ways in our country. "Is that really the Spanish way?" I asked, slightly bemused by his anthropological approach. He did turn out to be an anthropologist, by the way. "Spanish?" he snarled. "Absolutamente no. I'm speaking of us, the Andalusians. We are Arabs, you know. None of your Castilian nonsense here." So the stereotypical Spaniard, which we might feel we know, or need for our studies, may not really exist at all. And as for the Basques, the tall, dark, impulsive, fun-loving Spaniard may well be hard to find in Iberia. Scandinavians, especially, complain that lithe, flashing-eyed señoritas dancing the fandango on tables are fairly rare in that part of Spain. Many Catalans and Basques choose to speak their own languages in preference to Spanish, so your night school linguistic ability may go to waste. Likewise the guitar, the mantilla, and the tango. There is even, dare I say, a growing dislike on the part of some for the bullfight. Still, if you can't deal with a Spaniard as you conceive a Spaniard to be, you can always redefine him as a foreigner. At a dinner party recently, I heard a story told by a Spanish duchess which might form the basis of a useful exercise in dealing with foreigners. I am still puzzled, however, about whether it is designed to illustrate how well the British can manage foreigners, or to show the combination of stiff upper lip and insensitivity which is so often, of course wrongly, attributed to them. People who, in the English phrase, dine out on narratives may well find it useful to make them open-ended. Anyway, the Duchess said, "A Spaniard was drowning in the sea, having just fallen off a yacht at a harbour's edge, where water is often deep. As he came up for the third time, he espied an Englishman whom he knew, just disembarking from his own yacht. Luckily, he was within hailing distance. The Spaniard had enough breath left to bellow, 'I can't swim.' The Englishman stopped, turned towards the Spaniard and shouted, 'Do be quiet. I can't play the violin, but you don't hear me yelling all over the place about it.' 5. The Americans. I am willing to love all mankind except an American. Dr. Johnson, The Life of Samuel Johnson. The Brits call all Anglo-Saxon North Americans Yanks. This is a mistake. The Southerners hate the tag and snarl when they hear it. Canadians are North Americans too, but they like it even less than the Southerners if you call them Americans. You can tell the difference between Canadians and United States citizens, however, by a simple test. Get your candidate to say, "How now, brown cow?" The Canadian is the one who says his or her ow, rather like the people of Oxfordshire or Bucks do in England. In any case, I shall feel free to follow the august example of the OED and refer to United States citizens as Americans. As the English have discovered, the best way to deal with the United States Americans is to confuse them with words. Since the UK and USA usages are often different, you can achieve a great deal at negligible cost. Americans are generally credited with trying to impress you. If you suspect this, await your chance. For some reason, this next ploy works well with name-droppers. When your American says, for instance, I was invited to stay at the Kennedy home. Interrupt at once. Your opportunity has arrived. As you know, and the American probably doesn't, when an Englishman refers to a something home, he almost always means an institution, which is no such thing. Indeed, it's likely to be something like a facility for the psychologically disadvantaged, as in, you'd be far better off in a home. All you need to say is, "What were you diagnosed as having then?" in a very sympathetic tone. You can carry on with reminiscences about sad cases you have known until he has roared out his disclaimer. Then all you need to say is, "Home? You mean... Oh, I see. I'm awfully sorry." By then, of course, it is too late for your name-dropper to retrieve the situation. Mud sticks. However unjustly, there will be some people present at any social occasion where this gambit is played who will be vaguely sure forever after that at some time your unfortunate American was not exactly 100 cents on the dollar. The dollar. Americans concur with the English in accepting this unit of exchange as of paramount importance. English people will often refer to $64,000 questions, just as if this old Teutonic unit were still their own. Dealing with Americans, especially on their home turf, requires a proper familiarity with it. In the first place, it is pronounced dollar. A dollar is divided into 100 cents. These are often called pennies, although, of course, they are not pennies at all. $1 is divided into 20 nickels, which are equal to 10 dimes, because a nickel is 5 pennies and a dime is 10 pennies. For some reason yet to be determined, the Dollar is derived from the German Thaler, as is the penny from the Pfennig, but the cent is taken from the French. Research into this anomaly continues. Since you, the English, have got rid of the guinea, crown, half-crown, florin, groat, and so on, you can afford to be fairly complacent about money when dealing with Americans. Now, of course, I know that much British small change is so heavy that mending trouser pockets has become a growth industry, and that other coins, such as the 5-pence piece, are so small that the newspapers warn against letting small children choke on them. But you are in with a chance when scoring points about currency. If in doubt, as the English saying has it, bluff it out. Attack is the best form of defense. Money is serious in America. We almost automatically started to deal with money as soon as the subject of America came up, in conformity with the rule often heard in Britain, no conversation about the United States ever lasts for more than 3 minutes without the word dollar being involved. It is equivalent to the pious exclamations which pepper conversations in other cultures. Because of the seriousness of the whole subject, you can alarm most Americans, or at least catch them off balance, by speaking of their currency as quaint. Then go on a bit about dollars and quarters, and so on. Quaintness has its cherished place in all our hearts. The quaintness of the American ambassador some years ago has not yet passed off. People still tell the tale at dinner parties of his referring in front of Queen Elizabeth to the elements of refurbishment at his London home. The only people of England likely to understand this kind of English are ordinarily steered away from Her Majesty. On the subject of Holmes, there is an English anecdote which is attributed to many Americans, including Joseph Kennedy. Legend has it that it happened while he was United States ambassador to the court of St. James's. The story goes that the ambassador had just finished looking over a stately home he was thinking of renting for a country retreat in one of the shires. "Yes, the place seems okay to me," he is reported as saying. Then he saw, over the imposing doorway, the words carved in stone in Gothic script, "East, West, Holmes Best." Continued the ambassador, "Of course, that guy Holmes got to take his advertisement down." Americans complain, with some justification I think, that when they are direct they are charged with being uncouth, and when they try to fit in they are called poseurs. Perhaps they should stick to being professional at whatever is their speciality. Or maybe not. The word professional, says a serious journal in my library, always betokens, in England, something slightly distasteful. Then again, in today's Evening Standard, a leading article speaks of the quiet, steady professionalism of the British, which might perhaps be emulated by the brasher Americans. Perhaps the problem arises because the two peoples use the same words in different ways. I have seen Americans in polite society in London appalled by a phrase which is quite innocuous to the English. "Keep your pecker up, old thing." The usages are so intricate that they might almost constitute a different language. Certainly in 1978, a noble lord during a debate is on record as saying, "If there is a more hideous language on the face of the earth than the American form of English, I should like to know what it is." Americans may take comfort from the fact that even English in England is getting a little out of hand. For instance, I have just heard British TV's Channel 4 News repeat 7 times in an hour the phrase, "former Indian Prime Minister." There were several foreigners present. All of them wondered what nationality the former Indian now was. And a mass circulation tabloid constantly writes of British expatriates bemusing foreigners as well as the expatriates themselves. Baroness Thatcher, known to be keen on good grammar, must wince when she reads that one. But it perhaps does not give her such unease as the not uncommon phrase, "Margaret Thatcher, former British Prime Minister." One broadsheet I have just been shown has an educational section for younger readers. There is an article on great civilizations, pointed out to me by a 7-year-old. In All About the Sioux, I learn, more often than not, the settlers attacked the Sioux first, believing they were defending themselves. Believing that the Sioux were defending themselves, I am being asked, or that the settlers were. If no occasion for linguistic campaigning arises, you can always score over the Americans by steering the conversation towards the CIA. The intelligence outfits in the USA spend about $30 billion a year. Refer casually to the brilliant plot to poison Fidel Castro's beard, or to the Bay of Pigs invasion, and perhaps to the lack of a warning that Saddam was about to invade Kuwait. If all this is going a little too far, if you see a CIA glint, say, in your vis-a-vis eye, you can always use a traditional English damage limitation formula. Say, "Oh, I was talking about the other CIA." This is what the Culinary Institute of America of Hyde Park, New York, is called. Completely different, of course, from the crew over at Langley, Virginia. You can confuse matters sufficiently by alluding to the fact that the cooking school has a fresco of the Last Supper. This is boarded up for safekeeping as revealed by Time magazine. Spooks, no good cooks. Americans, USA Variety, have been complaining for years that the test for a third world country is whether people are anti-American. The Brits haven't quite got that far yet, but there are signs that they're learning. During the Gulf War, Britain was perhaps the closest ally of the United States, but you couldn't have told that by some of the parliamentary debates. The major airlines began skirmishing Wednesday to capture frightened American passengers for their half-empty planes. Robert Adley, a Conservative MP, huffed, "The Americans think they own the Atlantic and regard transatlantic travel as their fiefdom. The main cause of the slump is the pathetic behavior of Americans who believe that Baghdad is 43 miles from Piccadilly Circus." The Times produced a leading article, "Americans Afraid." Recalling that the term Great American Wimp was current during Reagan's presidency, the article called American ideas about personal danger ludicrous. Most Americans, it roared, are much safer abroad than at home. But it must be noted that none of the foregoing may work. This is because American culture has enough Anglo-Saxon content to enable Americans to run themselves down, rather as the Brits do. So they may laugh appreciatively at your attempts to put them down. This audio is made available by the Idries Shah Foundation and is copyright 2019. All rights reserved.